Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. And we're up to number 104, Haydn's last symphony. But this is not the end of the crusade, because we're going in the order of Anthony von Hoboken's catalog. So this is number 104. His actual catalog of symphonies goes up to 108. 106 is an overture, so we don't have to deal with that, although we might do it later just for fun. Number 105 is the Symphonie Concertante, and 107 and 108 are early symphonies discovered after the initial list were put together, so those are A and B. They're just called A and B, but they were written in the late 1750s, so they're quite early. And we're going to end with those, actually, which I think is going to be marvelous, but I'll talk about it when the time comes. Number 104. Even Haydn wrote on the manuscript, "The 12th I have composed in England." In English, by the way. He knew it was the end of his symphonies in England, and he wrote no others afterwards. Of course, he wrote the Creation, the Seasons, the Six Late Masses, a pile of string quartets, the Trumpet Concerto, a bunch of other wonderful things. Quite a few, some piano trios, all kinds of stuff that he wrote once he got back to Vienna in 1795-ish. But it's sort of easy to understand why he didn't continue after 104. I don't believe it's because he felt he had done everything he could do. It was nothing he couldn't do. And his evolution as a composer was so steady and so striking. He could have taken it further. There's no question about that. There wasn't anybody else writing symphonies who could touch him in the 1790s. But he had a dozen new symphonies, which he could play for Austrian audiences. They hadn't received their Vienna premieres yet, or most of them hadn't. So he had repertoire, in his suitcase that he could use, number one. Number two, he was feeling old and kind of retiring, but he was also thinking, as Bach did at the end of his life, of the future, of music that would last. When asked why he wrote the Creation, he said, "I wanted to write something that would last." And that meant music with words, usually on a sacred subject, something of obvious importance. For all their beauty and sophistication, abstract orchestral music without words was ephemeral. It was bound to be eclipsed by the latest new thing. And Haydn was right about that, because Beethoven's symphonies, Schumann's symphonies, Mendelssohn's symphonies, Brahms's symphonies, yes, the Haydn symphonies never completely faded from view. They didn't. But they ceased to be appreciated. They ceased to be treated as the unbelievably inventive, even radical works that they really were in their day. They began to be taken for granted. Mozart's last three symphonies, Haydn's a few with nicknames, those were the survivors of the classical period, and they deserved to survive, of course. But there was so much more that was terrific, and Haydn lived long enough to see all of the work that he had done, that he had slaved over, being completely and totally neglected. Remember, there were no recordings. There was nothing to preserve any of this stuff. You had to carry around manuscripts, and if there was a fire, as happened at Esterházy, which destroyed all of his manuscripts, thank God there were copies, everything that you did just went up in a puff of smoke, just disappeared. And so he spent the rest of his life attempting to write music with staying power. Thank God we have as much as we do. And it's worth keeping that in mind when we listen to this last symphony, which is actually called the London Symphony, even though all 12 of them were London symphonies. So this symphony is, like all of the London symphonies, special, unique in its formal structure and in its handling of themes and motives and in its expressive range and variety. It's an extraordinary work by any definition. It really is. And the unifying factor of this symphony is really, really interesting. And a little bit difficult to explain easy to hear. All of it's easy to hear, but to explain, and I'm going to do it anyway, so please bear with me if it comes out garbled and messed up, which sometimes these things will. The bottom line is that each of these last few symphonies, as Haydn began to wind up his symphonic career, he focused on creating works based on ever more simple and basic musical facts, musical ideas, simple rhythms, simple tunes, simple everything basic is stripped down to the primal essence of what music could do. Remember in Symphony No. 102, the thematic transformation of just two loud bangs and a little lyrical thing after each one. Things like that, just these really, really simple ideas. Well, this symphony takes that process to, I wouldn't say exactly an extreme, but to an apotheosis, because the entire symphony is not based on a repetition of rhythms or melodies or motives per se. It's based on the fact that all of the thematic material is constructed out of three basic intervals, very basic intervals: a fifth, a fourth, and a second. It doesn't mean that all the other intervals aren't there. They are. But the ones that Haydn emphasizes, as I've said many, many times, what he does is he'll take one of these primal building blocks and he'll thrust them to the forefront. He'll beat us over the head with them. He'll say, this is what matters. And whether it's just a simple scale or something just totally easy, every time we hear that basic thing, we hear it in relationship to all of the other uses of the basic thing to which Haydn puts it. So that's what happens in this symphony, particularly the interval, the second. That one really, really nails you because, all these other ones, they're what music is made of. Everything Haydn wrote is based on these intervals to some degree, but not to the extent that they're highlighted, that they're singled out for special treatment. That's what makes these things special, and that's one of the things that Haydn realized and that Beethoven really realized, and some of these other composers who came later, that you can take these basic things, these common things, and make something special of them simply by the way that you present them to the listener. And the way that you arrange your thematic material and handle everything. So it's the fifth, the fourth, and the second. And the introduction to this symphony is based entirely, well, almost entirely, on the fifth, the fourth, and the second. The opening fanfare, bum, 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 ba, da, 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 dum. The da, 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 dum is a fifth. Da, 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 dum. That's a fourth. And then we hear da 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 ya da. Well, da 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 is a second, and ya da is also a second. It's a rising second and a falling second. So it's the fifth, the fourth, and then rising and falling seconds. And that's what this introduction does. And composers heard this and went, "Oh, baby." I mean, Beethoven knew it really, really well. We hear something quite similar in the introduction to the first movement of his second symphony. Not at the beginning, he does it sort of in the middle of it, but it's there. And in the great unison theme that opens the first movement of
the ninth.
It's straight out of Haydn. All of Bruckner's huge unison themes, proclamations, have this opening of Haydn in mind, a big unison that emphasizes the basic musical intervals. But not everyone, not even Beethoven, created an entire work by emphasizing those primal intervals in the same way that Haydn did, which is what makes this piece so marvelous. But so you get a sense of it. The easiest way to hear it, because I'm going to be talking about each movement individually, but for its own special beauty and character. There's no point in going fifth, second, fourth. I mean, I will where it really is obvious, but you don't hear it as the music's going that way. You don't hear it at all. You just hear a certain relatedness between all of the ideas in the symphony, and And, but just to show you how it operates, I'm going to take possibly the easiest example, which is the opening melody of the minuet, which is really a scherzo. By now, Haydn has left the minuet somewhat behind, and this is quite scherzo-like, particularly if you play it quickly. But this performance isn't that fast, but you get the idea. It's the, what is this? It's the Austro-Hungarian Haydn Orchestra under Adam Fischer on Nimbus, or Brilliant Classics if you bought the licensed version. Just listen to the opening of the scherzo. It's a 10-second theme. Okay, that was the 10-second theme. So it begins with a fifth. Da da dum bum, da 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 dum bum, like that. So there's a third in the middle, by the way. And one of the things I need to point out is that that's why you shouldn't count intervals when you listen to this. Of course, Haydn uses thirds. He has to. And major and minor chords have thirds in them. You can't leave them out. But what he doesn't do is emphasize the thirds, except for one spot, which we'll get to. They're passing notes. They're there to give us the harmony we need, but they're not the melodic tones that matter. So if we take that tune, da da dum bum ba dum bum ba dum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum bum, we have da da dum bum. That's a fifth. Da da dum bum. Then there comes a second. Da dum bum. And then comes another second, the up and down one. Ya da 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 dum bum ba dum bum da dum. Da da dum bum ba dum bum ba dum. That's how it goes, right? Da da dum dum. Descending second, da dum bum. Then rising second, da dum bum ba da dum bum, which is a fourth. And then there's another fourth, da da dum bum. Second, da dum bum bum bottom. So I'm not like I could have taken it and cut it up into bits and played separate things. But again, I don't want to make you crazy over it. But you see that it's a fifth, it's a couple of seconds, it's a couple of fourths, another second. That's the tune, essentially, on the notes that matter, the notes that outline the melody. And that's what happens in most of the themes in these various movements. It's the melodic notes, the ones that matter when you strip away all the decoration and filler and other things that give us the fifth, the fourth, and the second, and which unify the entire symphony. And that is about all I want to say about that. Let me play you the introduction. Of course, we have to hear the introduction. Here it is. Now we come to the main body of the movement, the first movement, the exposition. It has a beautiful opening theme. Oh, it's so beautiful. Ya da da da, ya da 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 ba 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 da. Second, ya da da da. Descending scale. That means seconds, a chain of seconds. Ya da 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 dum bum ba da dum. A fourth. And then the second half of the theme, which is just like the first half for the first bit, and then it goes up instead of down. Ya da da da, ba da da dum bum 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 ba da, ya da 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 dum bum bum. Oh my God, I got it out. I can't believe it. Okay, so that's the principal theme, and it's based on fourths and fifths and seconds. So, okay, let's listen to the entire exposition. Oh, there's one other thing I want to tell you before we do that. I've seen descriptions of this movement as monothematic. Oh, that's so wrong. I don't know what these people were listening to. It has a very distinct and lovely second subject in a slower tempo even. It's longer notes. Here it is. Yeah, that's the second subject. Bum, 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 ba, da, da, dum. By the way, it's a fifth, rising and falling fifths. But that's the second subject. It's as plain as the nose on your face. But I saw on Wikipedia, someone said, oh, it's monothematic. No, we do hear the opening theme during the motion music on the way to the second subject a couple of times, sure. But hey, let's listen to the exposition. Here it is. All righty. Now we come to the development section. What do you think the development section is going to be based on? It isn't based on a theme. It's based on a motive. And that motive comes from the end of the first phrase of the first tune. Now, this is Haydn's like meat and potatoes stuff, where he grabs a motive from someplace you'd never expect. Ya da da da, da da dum bum 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 ba dum. Well, the motive that the development's based on is bum 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 ba dum. That's it. Dum bum 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 ba dum. And at one point in the development section, he uses it as an accompaniment dun, 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 to the second subject. Bum 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 ba da da dum bum bum. And you hear it underneath, but it's all about that little teeny tiny motive that Haydn just does unbelievably interesting things with. It's just fabulous. So here you have to hear the development section with that little tiny piece of the first subject, the most ineffectual bit that wouldn't even expect it. No way. But here it is. Alrighty. And so that's basically the first movement, although we must hear the coda. Why do we have to hear the coda? Well, the reason we need to hear the coda is because it returns to the motive, that motive from the development, and mixes it up. In other words, it acquires an independent life, all of its own. You hear the whole first subject, you hear the whole second subject. You really do. But Haydn wants to just keep developing it because it's like it becomes like an obsessive compulsive thing with the music. Once it gets its fangs into that little da 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 da, which is of course the second da 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 like that. I mean, he grabs it, he wiggles it around, he slaps it around. I mean, he just obsesses over that tiny little motive with that tiny little interval. So here is the coda to the symphony, a bit of the recap leading into the coda. It's just wonderful. Here it is. So it's fabulously inventive. And one of the things that's so inventive and marvelous about it, of course, is that because Haydn is plagued with these motives so obsessively, we don't think about intervals, do we? I mean, you're not listening to it going, oh, third, oh, fourth, oh, fifth, oh, second, oh, whatever. It's not, it's there. It's the guiding principle, the creative spirit behind the music. But what the music is actually developing are themes, motives, ideas, all the things that make the music ear-catching, that make us listen compulsively to what Haydn is doing. So that is the brilliant first movement. Now, the second movement is a type of variation movement. But at this point, Haydn in his career was so free in what he could do. These second movements, they're all different. Remember in the drum roll, the previous symphony, it was a very strict set of variations on two alternating themes. In 102, it was a sonata form variation movement where each section, the exposition, the repeat of the exposition, the development, and the recap, were different variations, basically, of the original material. This is sort of like that. It's a little bit like that because you have a very long theme. It's really, if you play it with repeats, it's 3 minutes out of an 8-minute movement, just for the one tune. You know, people who say that Haydn was like short-breathed in his ideas really have no idea what they're talking about. He could spin out a melody like nothing. And this particular symphony has one of his longest melodies. So I am playing it without repeats. So it's about 1.5 minutes of just continuous melody, beautiful, beautiful melody, where you hear the usual intervals, right? That's a fifth. Yeah, dum bum 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 bum. The rising chain of seconds, which is just a scale. But you see, even scales in this symphony, they sound like the second because Haydn has burned them into our brain in the introduction to the symphony. So this has all kinds of beautiful, beautiful phrases and sections and motives and things as it goes on for its 1.5 minutes or so. And here it is. Just listen to the melody. Don't worry about anything else. It's all there, but it's just lovely. Now after that, things start getting dramatic. You know, the timpani and trumpets come blasting in. We have some minor key Sturm und Drang, which I'm going to play you in a second. And essentially, the variations don't have to play the whole melody because it's huge. What Haydn does is he takes the bits of it that he is interested in for each variation, and he treats them all individually, and then we come back to the beginning of the melody, then it goes a little bit, then we come back to the beginning of the melody. So there's basically 4 iterations of the melody, but none of them are as extended as the initial one. All of the others condense and compress and create a different emotional ambience for each repetition of the tune. And each variation of the tune. So I'm going to play you just the first one, when the stormy one, because it's very, very exciting and totally different character from the actual theme, but you'll recognize all of the elements that Haydn is using very, very easily. Here it is. incredibly beautiful movement, and one whose formal genius is really special to this particular example. You know, Haydn is starting to work, unfortunately, ending to work. No, he continued doing it, only in other media. But he's working with forms that create themselves based on the nature of the material that he chooses to work with. It's incredibly free on the one hand, and on the other hand, incredibly well thought out, incredibly disciplined. That's the paradox, the heart of Haydn's creative genius. Now, you've already heard the opening of the minuet, because that was our example of fifths and fourths and seconds and things, the way that he builds a melody out of it. And it's such a catchy melody, isn't it? It's just wonderful. So I'm going to play you the entire A section, the first part of the minuet. Haydn writes out the initial repeat of the not the whole A section, because it's in two halves, both repeated, but he writes out the first half repeat. It's one loud, then one soft, and then there's a regular normal repeat for the second half. But here it is. Here's the whole sucker. It's quite short. It's a very brief minuet. It's just rhythmically interesting and bouncy and catchy melodically. It's just lovely. Now, the trio section, the middle section, is really something special. Haydn sets it off. He sets it off in two ways. First, by putting it in a very foreign key from that of the minuet itself. It doesn't matter which one it is. Just trust me, when you hear it, it just brings you up like, whoa, it sounds like it's coming from another piece entirely. It has a very foreign feel to it, because it's quite contrary to where the music had just ended. So I play you the ending of the minuet and the beginning of the trio, so you can hear that disjunction, which is really striking. And the reason for that disjunction we hear immediately, because the theme da 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 da, it is third based. It is the only part of the symphony where Haydn delights in emphasizing the interval of a third. And like I said, you don't have to know what the interval is. It doesn't make any difference. What matters is that it sounds so out of the ordinary, so like it came from another planet. It's light, it's folk-like, it's a typical Haydn trio. It has that sort of Austrian, Ländler or waltz-like, dance-like quality. It's just lovely. But my oh my, it seems to be taking place in another dimension, the dimension where the third rules. So I want you to hear the whole trio section, and it's wonderful the way it evaporates. It gradually becomes, Haydn writes a lead back to the minuet. It doesn't just have two halves that are identical. Eventually it starts to drift, as though it's like, it's getting pulled elsewhere. It loses its foundation, and then we hear the minuet come back. But it's a wonderfully poetic idea. It's gently humorous and witty, and absolutely brilliant. So here is the trio, and listen for all those sweet, sweet harmonies that Haydn builds into it, that whether you realize it or not, are based more than anything else in the symphony on the interval of a third. Just delightful, genius writing. So the finale is another movement based on a Croatian folk tune, apparently, as was the slow movement of Symphony Number 103. It's a really, really brilliant movement. It starts with a drone bass, the bagpipe thing like we heard in the finale of Symphony Number 82, the bear. There's quite a few of those, or in the trio of the minuet of Symphony Number 88. Haydn liked those. He liked bagpipes. He liked the sound of bagpipe drone is a fifth, by the way. So it was totally appropriate to use that here because the interval is a fifth. The melody itself, ya da 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 dum bum bum ba da dum bum, is based on the fourth. If you actually look at the first phrase of the first theme of the first movement, the 1-1-1, first phrase of the first theme of the first movement, ya da da dum ba da dum ba 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 da ya da da. So if you just part ya da da dum bum ba da dum, well that ya da dum, that little fourth is the beginning of the finale. Ya da dum ba da dum da da dum ba da dum. And if you listen to the initial fanfare from the introduction and the first theme of the first movement and the first theme of the finale, you'll hear that they're all related. They sound similar to each other, and that's because of Haydn's emphasis of these basic intervals. You could go on playing these games with this symphony forever because everywhere you look, you find that marvelous coherence and systematic use of this basic language that Haydn has decided he would adopt in this particular symphony. Anyway, so that's that, just so you know, okay? Because I'm going to get myself scrambled and get you guys even more confused than I am, so I don't want that to happen. This movement is in regular sonata form. It has a fully developed second subject, as does, the first movement, as did the first movement, and those second subjects are also similar in character, not necessarily in theme, but in character. They are slower in tempo, relaxed, more lyrical. And here it is. Here's the exposition. And pay attention to the whirlwind. You'll know it when you hear it. Brahms stole it and stuffed it in the finale of his second symphony. Yes, he did. I'll leave you to figure out where. Anyway, here it is, the exposition. And then, of course, there is an absolutely wonderful coda. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's so lovely. It feels so satisfying. There's something about it that's just totally, totally overwhelmingly fulfilling. You know, it's great the way it comes to an end. The very ending, the last three notes. Ba-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. If you look at, the score, what do we hear? Well, in relationship to each other, ba-da-dum, bum, bum, the second, dum, the fourth, bum, the fifth. That's how it ends, with the basic intervals emphasized. That's only Haydn can. And that's one of the things I think that makes it so fulfilling. It's just like, I don't know how to describe it other than to say, you've come home and all is well and the universe is as it should be. And we could really use that feeling, I think. So here is the coda and conclusion of the entire symphony. A very special work, a very special conclusion to Haydn's symphonic output. Wonderful way to conclude his career as a symphonist, and it leaves us wanting more, doesn't it? But the greatest music always leaves us wanting more. That's the right way to stop. It really is. And to leave us wanting more after having written 104 of these suckers, actually 107 at this point, by this point, is really an achievement unlike any other in the history of music. It has been an honor to speak to you about it, but I'm going to make a separate video about things I've learned from the Haydn Symphony Crusade. Just a short little summary, because it really belongs in, I think, its own separate space. So keep on listening, friends. 3 more to go. Take care.